Ever since Star Citizen was reshaped into the project that we are experiencing today, CIG has always promised something considerably more ambitious than simply giving players a collection of planets to visit. The real promise has been a living universe where those planets are places worth inhabiting, exploring, and interacting with. Yet, despite the enormous scale of the Perseus universe, planetary gameplay can still feel surprisingly destination-based. We fly to a city, an outpost, a bunker, a mining facility, or another point of interest, complete whatever activity brought us there, and then leave again. The vast landscapes between those locations can be spectacular, but apart from resource collection, they often remain little more than scenery. That is precisely why Starchitect could become one of the most important technologies introduced into Star Citizen's gameplay. According to CIG's current plans, Alpha 4.11 is expected to bring a collection of technologies under the Genesis umbrella, including Planetech V5, Starchitect, the Population Manager, a new Starchitect Mission Pack, a new Starchitect-generated point of interest. All of these roadmap cards are currently marked as tentative, so of course they should not be considered as guaranteed for 4.11. But if CIG succeeds in delivering the systems as described, they could fundamentally change the relationship between players and the planets they explore, and that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. So we have a giveaway this month. This month I'm giving a package. It's a Shiv and a Basher all together. All you have to do is to subscribe to the channel and comment to any video posted this month. 25 entries on the Wheel of Names for free, automatic entries for Patreon and YouTube members. Good luck to everyone out there. The important thing about Starchitect is that it simply is not a system for randomly putting buildings on planets. CIG describes it as a procedural world-building system capable of automatically scattering sectors, clusters, and locations across planetary bodies while constructing those locations from modular tiles. It also uses Genesis data to determine suitable locations for game objects. That distinction is extremely important. Procedural generation has sometimes become synonymous with randomness, but the system CIG is describing sounds much more controlled than that. Rather than simply throwing buildings across a landscape, Starchitect appears intended to use rules and environmental information to determine what should exist, where it should exist, and how the various pieces should be assembled. Imagine flying across a planet and approaching a region with the right terrain, climate, and environmental conditions for a particular type of industrial activity. Instead of that area remaining completely empty simply because no artist has manually placed an outpost there, Starchitect could potentially identify the location as suitable for one and construct it using appropriate modular components. The result would not necessarily be an infinite number of completely random locations. Instead, it could be a universe built from a library of carefully designed components and rules capable of producing a much greater variety of locations than CIG could realistically construct by hand. And that is where Genesis becomes particularly important. Planetech V5 is described as a major rework of how planets are built, populated, and rendered. CIG is aiming for emergent biomes driven by realistic physical properties, more natural distribution of plants and rocks, improved terrain shading, and GPU-based generation and spawning to support denser environments while improving rendering performance. On its own, that would already make planets more convincing, but combined with Starchitect, it becomes considerably more interesting. Genesis can potentially provide information about the physical characteristics of a particular region, while Starchitect uses that information when deciding how the world should be populated. The environment can therefore become part of the logic behind the placement of locations. A settlement in a frozen mountainous region does not necessarily need to look and function like a settlement in a temperate valley. An industrial facility near a resource-rich area will have a different purpose than an agricultural installation in a remote location. A frontier settlement belonging to one faction could have a completely different architectural composition from a corporate facility belonging to another. In other words, the world itself could begin influencing what is built within it, and that could have a profound effect on exploration. Today, experienced Star Citizen players already know many of the important destinations in the game. We know where the major cities are, we know where many bunkers and mining facilities can be found, we know where particular activities take place, and in many cases, the fastest way to reach them. That knowledge is useful, but also makes the universe predictable. Starchitect could introduce a new form of controlled unpredictability. The player could understand the rules governing the universe without necessarily knowing exactly what they are going to encounter on the next journey. You could be flying across a remote region and notice something unusual in the distance. Perhaps it is a settlement that you have never visited before. Perhaps there are industrial structures, landing pads, vehicles, and NPCs moving around the area. Perhaps the location belongs to a faction you rarely encounter. Perhaps there is even a mission available there. Hey, who knows, right? Suddenly, landing somewhere random has a reason. And that may be one of the most important changes Starchitect could bring to Star Citizen, the possibility that exploration itself becomes a source of gameplay rather than simply a way of traveling between known locations. The new Starchitect mission pack appears to be designed specifically to take advantage of the new randomness that will accompany the release of Starchitect. CIG describes these as new sandbox missions distributed across sprawling planetary locations with a focus on localized objectives designed to keep players planetside for longer. That wording is particularly interesting because it suggests a departure from the traditional mission structure. At present, many missions effectively tell us where to go and what to do. Travel to this destination, eliminate these targets, retrieve this object, deliver this cargo, then return somewhere else. The new approach could instead encourage players to remain within a particular region and interact with several nearby objectives. For example, imagine arriving at a remote settlement because a local industrial facility has stopped communicating. You investigate the facility and discover a problem. Completing that objective could lead naturally into another activity nearby. Perhaps a group of criminals has established itself in the surrounding area. Perhaps a shipment has gone missing. Perhaps a local security needs assistance. Perhaps another facility has become compromised, or maybe something more simple will be involved, such as transporting crates from one area to another a few kilometers away via a ground vehicle. The important difference is that the missions would no longer necessarily exist as isolated activities scattered across the entire planet. They could become part of a localized gameplay loop. That could finally give players a reason to stay in one place. Instead of spending our time traveling between mission markers, we could potentially establish ourselves temporarily within a particular region and work through several activities there. Our ship becomes more than a taxi, it becomes our mobile base of operation, and this is where the population manager could become just as important as Starchitect itself. CIG describes the population manager as technology designed to load balance the server population and create inhabitants appropriate to their local environment while enabling more complex interactions between agents based on dynamic context. That could potentially transform procedural locations from static scenery into functioning places. Let's take the example of a mining settlement, which should not merely contain buildings that look like a mining settlement. Ideally, it should contain people who have reasons to be there. Workers, security personnel, traders perhaps, industrial employees, and other inhabitants who could all potentially interact with their surroundings and with one another. We can always dream, right? Star Citizen is so far from this now. But anyway, the result could be a location that feels like it exists independently from the player. This is an important distinction here. One of the weaknesses of traditional mission locations is that they can sometimes feel as though they were constructed solely because the players needed to go somewhere to complete a mission. Starchitect, combined with the population manager, could move Star Citizen closer to a model where the location exists first, inhabitants live there, and missions emerge from the circumstances surrounding that place. That would make the universe feel considerably more organic. The faction component could make this even more interesting. CIG indeed specifically describes Starchitect points of interest as new ground locations owned by various factions, offering procedurally generated combinations of building compositions. These locations are intended to support a wide variety of mission archetypes and gameplay loops. If faction identity becomes part of the generation process, players could eventually learn to recognize locations not simply by their coordinates, but also by their appearance, architecture, and function. You might encounter a remote industrial facility and immediately recognize who operates it. You could understand something about the purpose of a settlement simply from the way it is constructed. And if faction ownership affects its inhabitants, available missions, or potential conflicts, the visual identity of a location could become meaningful gameplay information. This could also help make the planets themselves feel less generic. One of the challenges facing a game as enormous as Star Citizen is that scale can work against detail. The more planets and locations CIG wants to create, the more difficult it becomes to manually construct everything. Handcrafted locations can be extremely detailed, but they are also expensive and time-consuming to produce. Starchitect potentially changes that equation. Instead of having developers manually construct every individual settlement, CIG can create modular pieces, templates, rules and systems that allow those components to be assembled into many different locations. That doesn't mean that handcrafted content becomes obsolete, quite the opposite. The quality of the individual modules, environmental assets, and rules becomes even more important. But once those foundations exist, the development team can potentially produce far more locations without having to build every one from scratch. This is where procedural generation can become genuinely useful. The goal isn't necessarily to create an infinite number of locations. The goal is to make the universe large enough that players can encounter meaningful places without CIG having to manually author every square kilometer. But there is an important caveat here. Procedural generation does not automatically create good gameplay. CIG could generate thousands of settlements and still end up with thousands of boring settlements. More buildings do not automatically mean more reasons to play. The real test for Starchitect will therefore not be whether it can generate locations. The real test will be whether those locations feel meaningful. A procedurally generated industrial compound becomes interesting when something is happening there. It becomes more interesting when the people living there have purposes and behaviors. It becomes even more interesting when players have multiple reasons to interact with them. That is why the combination of Genesis, Starchitect, the Population Manager, and the new mission systems is potentially far more significant than any of these technologies individually. Genesis can define the physical world. Starchitect can determine how that world is populated with locations. The Population Manager can provide inhabitants appropriate to those environments, and the mission systems can give players reasons to interact with those places. If all of those systems eventually work together as intended, Star Citizen could move closer to something that has always been part of the larger ambition, a universe where gameplay happens because the world exists, rather than a world that exists primarily to host gameplay missions. That could also have a major impact on professions beyond combat. Mining, salvaging, cargo hauling, bounty hunting, mercenary work, exploration perhaps, and even simple trading could potentially benefit from having far more localized places to interact with. A remote settlement might need supplies, an industrial facility might produce valuable resources, a faction outpost might offer contracts, a stranded ship might generate a rescue opportunity, a hostile group might establish itself somewhere unexpected. The more diverse the locations become, the more opportunities there are for different professions to intersect. And that could be especially valuable for players who don't want every gaming session to revolve around flying back to the same handful of major cities. Perhaps one evening you simply land on the planet and start working in a particular region, you complete a contract, you find another opportunity nearby, you refuel, you sell something, talk to an NPC, discover another location, and encounter another player doing something completely unrelated. And before you know it, several hours have passed without ever returning to a major hub. That is the kind of planetary gameplay loop Star Citizen has always needed. Ultimately, the most exciting possibility is not that Starchitect will give Star Citizen more locations, it is that it could make the locations we discover matter. The universe could become less about memorizing where anything is and more about understanding the world itself. Players would still have to get their favorite places, profitable routes, and established destinations, but there could always be another settlement, another facility, or another opportunity waiting somewhere beyond the next ridge. And perhaps that is the real promise of Starchitect. For years, one of Star Citizen's greatest strengths has also been one of its greatest weaknesses. The universe is enormous, but enormous spaces are not necessarily meaningful places. Starchitect, if delivered as described, could begin filling that gap. It could turn planets from enormous landscapes containing isolated points of interest into environments where locations, populations, factions, and missions are woven together. The most important destination on the planet might no longer be the one already everyone knows, it could be the one you just discovered. Of course, there's still a very long road between the promising procedural world-building systems and a genuinely dynamic universe. All of these roadmap cards are currently tentative, and the quality of the final experience will depend on how well these technologies interact in a live game. But if CIG can make the pieces work together, Alpha 4.11 could represent something much more important than simply another content update. It could mark the beginning of a Star Citizen where the planet itself becomes the gameplay. And that's all for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you enjoyed the content, let me know with a thumbs up. Really helps the channel a lot. Let me know what you guys are your expectations for Starchitect. I would love to read that as well. Well, if you want to have more videos like that, don't forget to subscribe. We've got a lot of people who just joined recently. Last video had over 120 new subscribers, guys. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me, guys, especially after doing this for a long time. It's awesome to see the channel growing. And again, thank you so much. A big shout out to everybody who helps the channel financially on Patreon. That also helps a lot, including Dr. Frobin, So Carter Sisters, The Key to Ducker, Shadow Rise, and Zero Crusher. I've been the Eradicator. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.